belated Happy New Year to everyone. Well, happy-ish. In my volunteer comms, I put happy-ish New Year, which perhaps a bit negative, but anyway. Lovely to see everyone. So what I'm going to do today, guys, is I'm just going to take you through a little bit about a big volunteer recruitment that we did at the Zoological Society of London last year during the pandemic, which could be a bit contentious. So I just wanted to tell you what we did, what went well or didn't quite go so well, and what lessons we learned going forward. So now I'm going to attempt to share the screen. Here's to the first technical difficulty of 2021. Is that all sharing, Will? Can you double check for me?
Yeah, all good.
Perfect. All right. So as I say, I'm just going to take you through a little bit about recruiting in the pandemic. So there are a couple of slides that you will have seen before that I'm just going to take you through just to remind you as to who we are. So let me move on to the next page. I can't seem to, there we are. So this is who we are. So ZSL is an international conservation charity, and we have a rather grand vision of a world where wildlife thrives. But you probably know us more because we have two zoos, London Zoo and Whipsnade Zoo. And we've got lots of firsts and lots of oldest awards as part of ZSL, as you can see there. But more importantly, we've got over 20,000 animals as well. But more than that, we've also got groundbreaking conservation fieldwork happening across the globe in over 50 countries, and also a cutting edge science program as well. So ZSL is a little bit more than just the zoos. But just to put it in context, we have around 750 volunteers at the current time and around 600 staff. Sadly, we have just been through a bit of a restructure with some staff losses, so it might be a little bit less than that now. So again, you'll have seen this slide before, but I thought it was important for thinking about the recruitment I'm going to talk about more in a second. So when we reopened back in June, the government gave zoos and aquariums 5 days of notice to reopen. So it was quite short. So in order to bring back our current volunteers, we quickly pulled together a sort of a fact sheet to show them how we would be managing that and how we would be returning volunteers. So for us, it was a question of returning the volunteers in order of importance for the organisation and safety for them and the organisation as a whole. So organisational need, the volunteer roles, and then the individual circumstance of them and where they were in life as well. And for the higher risk volunteers, we undertook individual risk assessments before they returned. But the only role we really brought back to begin with was a stewarding role to ensure that the zoos were COVID safe back in June. Unlike museums and galleries, we don't routinely have staff on the ground undertaking kind of general visitor experience and security monitoring. We have specialist roles in that, but it meant that we needed a whole raft of people to sort of welcome, support people to understand how to visit under the new restrictions. So that was quite a different role to the one the volunteers had done previously. And again, you've seen these two things before if you've joined us. The redeployment fact sheet on the left was the same for all volunteers to really clearly outline that we were being open and transparent. And I think fair to everyone is a big thing that I'm keen on. And then on the right-hand side, we asked volunteers to self-declare whether they were in a low, medium or high risk group, depending on their personal circumstance and health position. We didn't ask them to necessarily declare their health conditions, but we asked them to group themselves, and we dealt with them accordingly to that. So we took quite a low risk approach to bringing volunteers back. At that time, we brought the low risk back first and then moved up the risk categories. And now any volunteer in any of those risk groups, when we're not in lockdown, could be back volunteering with us with additional adjustments. So why did we recruit then? So we started recruiting towards the end of June 2020. So only sort of a few weeks into reopening after that first lockdown, which might seem rather unusual to start recruiting at that time. But the reason we did, as outlined on the screen, is that we were unable to meet the zoo demands. So what we needed, we made our zoos one way. We had only certain exhibits open, some were closed. We asked people to visit in a different way. And actually that was quite baffling for visitors coming back from after a 3-month break. But also we spotted a lot of new visitors to us as well, who'd never visited before. So for us, it was quite critical to ensure that that visitor experience was really supportive and positive. So we really wanted to have ZSL representatives visible on site to help visitors to understand how to get the most out of their visit to the zoos. But it meant we didn't have enough volunteers, sadly. The reason for that was that our supportive process to return the volunteers was quite slow, being really honest and upfront. So it meant that actually we didn't necessarily have all the volunteers ready to go when we needed them to. But also we were very committed to supporting volunteers to come back when they felt ready to, in a phased way, when they were happy that things were sort of set up as they'd like. So not everyone was ready to come back in June anyway. And then lastly, the new operating systems, new one-way systems around the zoo required more numbers than even if every volunteer had wanted to come back in June that we had available. So we knew we had to do some recruitment. The other big reason for us was that, you may have seen it, but ZSL had done quite a prominent fundraising campaign with David Attenborough leading it to raise the profile and the sort of plight of ZSL at this time, but also to seek fundraising. So for us, it was quite an easy way to piggyback off the back of that and to put it as a sort of an alternative way to give by, if you're not able to or don't feel comfortable giving money, and not everyone is by any stretch of the imagination, and another way that you could give is by volunteering with us. And that went down really, really well, as you'll see in a minute. But it was also a really good opportunity to diversify the volunteer team, because what we knew after lockdown 1 was there were a lot of people who previously would have been in employment or doing other things, were now available and looking to give back and support, and actually really wanted to support the sort of job market as well, and actually support people to develop and continue gaining new skills when perhaps employment was a bit of a trickier prospect at that time. So hopefully a bit win-win. How was it received by volunteers? So we wrote to all the volunteers in advance of the campaign, outlining that we were recruiting, why we were recruiting, asking for their support to recruit, because obviously we know that your existing teams, your existing workforce are really, really vital to ensure that something is positively received, but also providing reassurance to them that this wasn't a displacement exercise to get rid of them. So you can see some of the wording there in the speech bubbles. So, this in no way is about displacing the current team, but rather about complementing your enthusiasm, experience, whilst ensuring that we also don't exert your will. Oh, I can hear someone in the background, just ensure you guys are muted for a sec. So it was about reassuring them as well, but inevitably we did have mixed feedback from our visitor-facing volunteers. We did have complaints, we did have concerns that it was a bit of the out with the old and in with the new. Why are they recruiting when I'm not back yet? I don't feel ready to be back, but will there be a place for me in the future if they're recruiting loads of new people? So all understandable completely. But on the other side, we had people who were nonplussed by it, were happy. It's just part of what the zoo needs to do to keep themselves going. And we had some very positive reactions, and some people were very keen to support and acted as case studies for us as well. So how did we recruit? Because it was a common cause to open the zoo safely and positively, it did mean that we were able to do a cross-ZSL approach. So marketing, PR, digital, HR and learning were all involved in this. Now, I would say that this is the first time this has happened for me at ZSL. So it really was a galvanizing of everyone working together, which is brilliant. We had a huge PR campaign. Because it was off the back of the Attenborough campaign, we had to make sure that it sort of looked similar and that it had a similar aplomb. We had a light touch registration form. So it simply asked, very minor personal details, what their preferences were around availability and site that they'd volunteer at, and a couple of health and safety questions just to check that they weren't in high risk categories at that time. Then they were all offered, so everyone was offered the chance to attend a face-to-face, socially distanced taster session. Now, everyone was offered the chance, but not everyone was able to attend one, and I'll explain why in a second. But everyone was offered that chance, and they were asked to sign up to attend a date, and it was a little bit of fastest finger first, I grant you. We then, in the taster sessions, we did a bit of intros. We asked them to look around the site. We asked them to go and speak to current members of the team about what it was like to volunteer on site. And then we did some socially distanced group tasks and had a Q&A. So it's quite short, quite quick, but we had loads of members of our visitor-facing team involved, so that we had lots of eyes and ears on the ground, kind of observing our candidates to see who might be a good fit for the zoo. We then asked, as part of the process, we had to get a bit more information from them, obviously, and took up references as per our safeguarding policy. We then sent out information packs by email, and they had a face-to-face induction with staff. Now, this did change a little bit as time went on. We did start doing it as one-to-ones or small groups, but then as the momentum of the campaign grew, we had to do it as larger groups, again, that could socially distance. And then volunteers were encouraged to come and then shadow existing members of the team until they felt comfortable with the day-to-day routine of volunteering. And the chap that you can see on the screen there, David, was one of our new volunteers that came in as part of the campaign, who then, he came in the campaign. He was one of our models for our campaign. This is some of the areas that you can see where our PR reached. I was absolutely overwhelmed, to be honest, with how successful the PR campaign had been. To see our volunteers and our drive featured in Marie Claire and Stylist and places like that was off the charts for anything I'd experienced before. But we also used social media. We got spots on the news. And I think partially because we were able to twin our recruitment campaign with a general support the zoo's message, it meant it gained more traction than it might otherwise. So I think it was very fortuitous, the timing. I don't think if we did this again, we'd probably get quite such an amazing reach. But in terms of the outcome, it was really, really positive. We had over 2,500 people apply. Now, that is bonkers for us. For a typical recruitment, perhaps for London Zoo, for a visitor-facing role, prior to this campaign, we might have had maybe 20 to 40 people apply, and this was 2,500. That was off the charts for us. And in fact, it was actually more than we wanted, ironically. So we managed to treble our visitor-facing volunteer numbers. And in London Zoo, you can see the vast majority of our current team now are new. We have got a lot of people waiting in the wings, but they still don't feel comfortable returning just yet. And then in Whipsnade, it's about half and half existing volunteers and new. But we also now have the benefit of a huge waiting list of people for future opportunities off the back of that. You see my positive spin on that. But in terms of sort of reflection, so it's quite hard to have lessons learned about this because the collision of the different factors, hopefully we won't find ourselves in a time like this again. Hope for at least a couple of decades at least. It's quite hard to think about how you'd apply some of these lessons learnt for a future situation, but there is always something you can learn. It was anecdotally told to us many, many times that the light touch recruitment process was very much appreciated and easy for people. It was very easy to complete. It could be done in a matter of moments. What we learned was you need to get the background infrastructure right. So we don't currently have any volunteer management software, believe it or not, for such a large institution. So it was all very manual and very time consuming. And we had low numbers of staff right at the beginning as well, because a lot of our staff were still on furlough. So for me, I think if I was able to backtrack, I'd make sure that I had thought properly about that before embarking on this, but I was kind of being shoved by our senior team at the same time. So not that easy to manage. The power of PR is huge, as you can see, but what the challenge we had was the interest vastly outweighed the demand. So sadly, it did leave some people disappointed. So it's about sort of ensuring that your activity is proportional to the scale of need. Now, for us, it was very difficult to know this because we had absolutely no idea what the uptake would be like, or from both the press partners, but also from members of the public to volunteer. So there was no benchmark on which to sort of start. So that was quite hard to think about. But for us going forward, we now have a way of thinking about it. But also as the campaign gained momentum, the backlog of administration grew and turnaround slowed. So again, in retrospect, thinking about how to readjust and recommunicate expectations, both internally to the organisation, to ourselves. I was working all hours at one point to try and keep ourselves on track. And actually, I should have been honest with myself a little bit and a bit more realistic about it. But also externally to those candidates to say, actually, it's going to take a little while longer once momentum has reached. But also the short turnaround and the quick kind of having to sort of set this going, and the scale of the recruitment that we were managing meant that evaluation and monitoring weren't built in. So it's quite hard now reflecting on it, because it was all guns blazing, get on and do it, without sort of perhaps properly planning it like you would normally do in a situation. So those are all sort of things I would ideally have done, but time was so crucial in this that I think I could be forgiven for not putting them in there. But that's a very quick whistle-stop tour through the recruitment. I'm very happy to take any questions, but hopefully that was interesting at least to have a little read of. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Brilliant, thank you, Rhiannon. It was a stop tour, but it was amazing to see how many volunteers you recruited in such a short time frame, and the power of volunteering and the ability when working alongside different departments to really make an impact, both visually but also on the message you're getting out about the need to support cultural organisations like ZSL. I've got time for one question before we head over to Matt, and we can pick up some of your questions later. A lot of people are saying it's amazing achievement. They're all interested in the light touch recruitment form. Firstly, how short is it? And in hindsight, was there anything you'd add back on?
Really good question. Sadly, as one always does, hindsight is this wonderful thing. I forgot to take a screenshot of it. So this was a form that was embedded into the website. So they didn't need to download anything. They didn't need to take anything off. They went onto the page. That page, the URL was then able to be linked into all our campaign materials. So it was really easy to find. It was literally name, contact details, so an email and a phone number. We asked people to give us a date of birth purely so that we could check they were over the age of 18, because that's our threshold for volunteering. What venue, so Whipsnade and London Zoo. What their availability was. So we gave them a drop-down menu, 4 different options. And again, it was any preference. We weren't going to hold them to it. And then the last 4 questions, which led on from one another, were around health and safety. So are you being asked to shield at the moment? Because bearing in mind, this was right at the beginning of the pandemic, where those that were in the higher risk categories were really still shielding at this time and not encouraged to volunteer. So we were obviously having to toe the party line with that. So asking if they were close by to the zoos, so they didn't have to travel too far and get public transport. Were they shielding and or high risk? And did they have any additional needs or disabilities that we should be aware of so that they could volunteer safely with us? And again, that's not one that would have limited them from being involved. It was just so that we knew in advance of them attending. They pressed submit on the website and it came straight through to us as a web form. So for them, it was super easy. Wasn't super easy for us, because that generated an email for every one of those that needed to be uploaded. So that's what I'm saying. Without the integrated volunteer management system that we don't have in place right now, it was lovely and light touch for our applicants, which is really what I wanted, but it was a beast for us, and unfortunately. Anything I would add? Sorry, anything I would add? Yes, the one thing when I was writing this up, in fact, and I oohed and ahed about whether to add it in at the time, would have been, how did you find out about this opportunity? We talk about it a lot, but because that web form was being produced at the rate of knots, and I didn't want the web form to be too long, I didn't want to put that in as an extra question, but in hindsight, that was an error on my part. So yeah, definitely that one.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rhiannon. And we will move on to Matt. And Matt will be talking about his reflections on 2020 and looking towards 2021 and what it means for volunteering. Welcome, Matt.
Hello, everybody. I think everybody knows me, but I'm Matt Hick. I'm head of volunteering at Science Museum Group and chair of Heritage Volunteering Group. And hopefully you can see the presentation there on your screen. Can you see that, Will?
Yeah, it's all up.
Brilliant, super. Let me just move this around a little bit. So Will's asked me to come along and talk about kind of what volunteering in the sector might look like in 2021. A nice, easy question. So thank you for that, Will. So we'll start with just reflecting back on 2020 as this tower collapses to the ground. What a year. Harry and Meghan left the royal family. Of course, we left Europe and entered an incredibly long transition period. Sadly, the new Bond movie was postponed. And of course, COVID came along, and that will have a profoundly transformational effect, both on volunteering within the sector and the sector as a whole. And as I say, what Will's invited me to talk about today is what volunteering in the sector will look like this year and beyond. But sadly, I'm not like Mystic Meg here. I haven't got a crystal ball and I can't really predict the future. In fact, I'm a little bit more like this guy here, and I don't know what you guys are like, but I kind of get up in the morning. I don't know which way is which. I get in the shower with my clothes on, and I'm not really in any position really at the moment to predict what the future might look like. So instead, what I thought I would do is pose 5 questions and provide a little bit of information around those questions and a few things that you might be able to sort of take away and use to kind of help answer them. And the first of those questions is, will COVID volunteering result in more volunteering in the long term? And initially we saw this kind of huge upsurge in people volunteering to take part in COVID relief efforts in sort of March, April, May time, and this kind of really led to things like the Kruger report, which hopefully some of you have seen, that came out this year, that really kind of talked about this kind of mass army of people that existed in the UK that could then be mobilised to volunteer in a whole range of other areas. And I think in initial conversations amongst ourselves within the HVG steering group, like other areas of the voluntary sector, saw that as a really great thing potentially, and that we may see kind of volunteering levels within our own sector increase over the next years and years to come. But what the data that's come out more recently has shown is that that's highly unlikely to be the case. So I don't know whether any of you saw the Nfp Synergy report that we put out on Facebook. We put it out just before Christmas, and then we put it out last week as well. But what that shows is that actually by August, volunteering levels had fallen to their lowest in 10 years. And that was, of course, because that upsurge in initial COVID volunteering had stopped, and a large number of people were now no longer able to volunteer within their own normal role. So many of our heritage volunteers weren't able to come back, for example. What we also saw in the data was that volunteering amongst 16 to 24-year-olds had spiked initially, and we'd seen this kind of huge kind of groundswell in youth volunteering, had actually just returned to pre-pandemic levels. And when you coupled this with the fact that older age groups, our traditional demographic of volunteer, were no longer able to volunteer, you start to see why those figures fell to the lowest in 10 years. So actually what the data is suggesting is that initial groundswell in COVID volunteering is unlikely to result in any kind of long-term growth, or automatically any long-term growth in volunteering in the sector. However, I do think there are 3 things that we can learn from what happened during that initial kind of period of volunteering, and that if we apply that to the way that we develop and deliver volunteering in our sector, then we can reap some benefits from what's happened. And the first thing is, we need to make heritage a cause worth giving up your time to support. What we saw initially was that actually people were highly motivated to volunteer for COVID, to help people, to save people's lives. And actually, maybe we can't go to that extent with heritage, but I think we can do a lot more to sell volunteering in the heritage sector and to motivate people to give up their time to do that. The next thing is we need to make it far easier for people to volunteer. And what Good Sam showed was that actually, and the merits of Good Sam, and I don't know whether Rob's on the call as a Good Sam volunteer himself, but actually what that showed is that actually people were motivated to volunteer and they wanted to do it immediately, and Good Sam provided them with a way of doing that. What they don't want is to sign up to volunteer, then to wait 3 or 4 weeks for an interview, then to wait for an induction, then to wait for role training, and for it to be 3 months down the line before they can actually volunteer. They want to volunteer, they want to help, and they want to help now. And then the third thing is that people need to be able to see and understand the difference that they make. When you pick up somebody's shopping and deliver it to their house, or when you take their medicine to them, you have that immediate and visceral response from them that responds to your motivations for volunteering. And we need to try and ensure that we can do that through the volunteering opportunities and the way that we deliver volunteering in our organisation. And I think if we can do those 3 things, then actually we can start to grow volunteering and we can learn some really useful lessons. So the next question is, will our ethical compass be spun to a breaking point? And I guess this is a question that really comes from what I think is likely to happen over the next sort of months, and which has already started to happen now. We're going to be asked, when is it right to bring volunteers back? Our organisations may want to bring them back sooner than we feel it's safe. We're going to be asked, what is the role of volunteering during times when redundancies are made, and what part volunteers should play in the future of our organisations? And these are actually, or they can be really, really difficult questions to answer. And so what I just want to kind of share with you is some information from a really brilliant article that I read on Engage and it was an article called Ethics for Volunteer Engagement Profession by Catherine Campbell and Erin Spink, who some of you might remember came and spoke at an event earlier in the year. And if you're not members of Engage, I'd really recommend signing up for that. But what the article does is it talks about kind of 3 particular types of ethics and how we can use, or how we can understand them and use them in our decision making. So I guess the kind of first thing to say is what is ethics? And ethics refers to principles that define behaviour as right and good and proper, and what society would deem in any normal circumstances as right, good and proper. And what we typically bring to the table or are surrounded by are kind of 3 different types of ethics. Personal ethics, which are the values that we all hold, so the values and principles shared and shaped by your history, your experience, religious beliefs, and ethnic culture, so what you personally believe to be right. Your organisational ethics, and this is really important point actually. So this is a set of principles that's adopted by your workplace that is designed to ensure consistency of action rather than leaving it up to us as individuals and every individual to apply their personal ethics to a situation. And then professional ethics, so values that are generally accepted within our profession that govern good practice. And hopefully you can see already that actually 2 or 3 of those things, they might all be at odds with one another. And I think this framework and thinking about decision making in these terms can be really helpful. I mean, we can all see a situation where actually our personal ethics and professional ethics around actually what is right, what are the right roles for volunteers, might come into stark contrast with what an organisational ethics are, particularly in terms of running effectively and efficiently, and therefore the role that volunteers can provide in helping us to do that. So, I could run an entire session on this, but what I just want to do is kind of spark your imagination and hopefully inspire you to kind of go away and delve into this a little bit more in a little bit more detail. But this is a really great article, and if you're not members of Engage, I would kind of recommend joining it and having a good read of this article. It comes from one of 2 parts, and the second one should be coming out soon. The third question I've probably been asking for 10 or 11 years is, will virtual volunteering finally take its place as the future of volunteering? So when we conducted our volunteering survey in 2019, that some of you may remember, and if you don't remember it and haven't seen it, you can get the results from our website. That survey showed that only 1% of volunteers were actually engaged in digital roles. When we did capacity building survey in the sector this year, or this past year, sorry, that had risen up to 3.6%. But as we know, again, from the same survey, on-site volunteering has fallen by 90% across the sector, and that's reflected in the findings within Science Museum Group. And digital volunteering offers us an amazing opportunity to engage with our audience when our doors are closed. It allows us to provide volunteers with meaningful activities when they're not on site, and it also allows them to connect with one another. So virtual volunteering does provide an amazing opportunity for a whole range of things, and it's something that we really should be looking to take forward as volunteer managers. And we've had talks at some of the coffee afternoons before that have demonstrated some of the brilliant activities that are being done in the sector, but I do feel there's a lot more we can do to develop and deliver digital volunteering. And there are issues around technology and skills within an organisation, but part of the challenge that we face is also coming up with ideas. So what I've just kind of got on this next slide are kind of maybe 4 different types of volunteering that can be done in a digital space. Just kind of, again, kind of spark your imaginations. First is kind of administrative type roles, and these are often activities involving volunteers in things like producing newsletters, and they're usually they can be kind of really helpful roles, certainly to volunteer managers. And I'll speak as somebody who's got sort of several volunteers supporting me in administrative roles. But obviously, usually they only enable a smaller number of people to get involved because of the scale of the roles. Collections volunteering, which is often the most kind of common form of virtual volunteering in our sector, and that's really thinking about actually how do we creatively and usefully involve volunteers in enhancing our understanding of the collection and undertaking research. Visitor engagement, which is something we've really started to get to grips with at Science Museum over the last few months. We don't have any roles live yet, but it's something we're starting to think about. But how do we take some of our object handling and tour guiding roles and transfer them into the public space by providing opportunities for volunteers to sign up for talks that are delivered across platforms like Zoom? So not necessarily using really complex platforms, but actually how can we use the technology that we already have at our fingertips to take those activities and transfer them over into the virtual space? And then last but not least, micro volunteering, and this recommendation comes from a book which name now rather embarrassingly escapes me, New Power, actually, about how you utilize kind of digital platforms like Twitter and other social media platforms to engage large numbers of your audience in kind of really small volunteering activities. And that might be just retweeting content and things like that. And actually, by not putting any barriers in terms of how people can engage with that material and share it, you offer a huge or a doorway for a large number of people to come in and start engaging with you and volunteering. And I would recommend picking up New Power and having a read of that. It does clearly a far better job than I've just done in explaining that form of micro volunteering and how it can help you grow and develop volunteering and audience engagement in your organisation. The next question is, will Black Lives Matter lead to meaningful change in volunteering? And for those of us that have been involved in volunteer management for a long time, we have seen very little movement in diversity in volunteer engagement during that time. And if we look at our survey from 2019, again, only 5% of our volunteers come from non-white British backgrounds. Further information in the survey showed that only 5% described themselves as coming from an LGBTQ+ background or as having a disability. So this is interesting, particularly when we compare it to what came out of the capacity building survey, where what we're seeing there is a sector that knows, I think we know as a sector we need to do more to change what volunteering looks like, and I would include feels like within our organisations. I would include inclusion in there. But actually what the 2020 capacity building survey showed was that as organisations we're not prepared or we don't feel confident to make those changes. So, you know, the biggest things that people were saying were that actually we need greater support for engaging new audiences and also for developing new models of volunteering as well. So what can we do? And again, this is something that, you know, we could run an entire session on. So I'm just going to go through this very quickly here. But the first thing that we can all do is educate ourselves. So learn to see the world from other people's perspective and understand what the barriers to participating in our organisations are. And it's great, I know we've got Tamsin on the call and Ben as well, who are involved in our EDI working group, and that they're working hard to put together a whole range of resources that will enable all of us to educate ourselves and understand issues around volunteering in our organisations from different perspectives. And it's really important that we engage with that material. The next thing that we can do is, using that knowledge, is think about a systemic review of systems and processes within our organisation. So actually thinking of having a better understanding of what the barriers are to participating in our organisations, then actually going through each of our systems, each of our processes, and removing those barriers. The third thing is about engaging community partners. So actually, if all we're going to do is, if we do those first two things, but all we do is write our role descriptions in the same way, advertise them on our websites, all that's going to happen is that the same members of the Civic Corps are going to volunteer with us, and that we will see no meaningful change. If we want change to happen, we have to get out from behind our desks and we have to go and work with the communities that we want to engage with, and we have to co-create roles and enable those partners to shape volunteer opportunities that are right for them. Following on from that is the enrichment and engagement and activities, and this is where we need to develop enrichment and engagement offers that actually appeal to the audience that we want to engage with. You know, I was volunteer coordinator at the NRM for a long time, and I was really pleased with our enrichment and engagement activities. But they were all railway-based activities, and actually, if you had no interest in the railways, I'm sure that was a terrible offer that I was providing. So we need to start thinking about creating a much more tailored opportunity, enrichment and engagement activities that actually appeal to the people that we want to involve in our organisations. And then we need to build an inclusive culture. We need to make sure that actually our organisations are warm and welcoming to people from different backgrounds. And actually that's hugely challenging, and that isn't something that we can do on our own. And that's why we need to grow as leaders, so that we can influence across our organisations and create that inclusive feel. And that brings us nicely on to the last question, which is, can we be the organisations, can we be the leaders our organisations need us to be? Our 2020 capacity building survey showed that actually senior roles leading volunteer engagement are rare, and that actually only 40% of organisations, or 40% of organisations don't have a volunteering strategy, so no long-term plans for the development and evolution of volunteering within those organisations. And so the onus really kind of falls on us to do what we've just talked about. As this very cheery chappie is saying, you know, change starts with us. These things will only happen if we make them happen. But leading change is difficult, and delivering all of these things is really hard. And so what I would draw your attention to, if you've not seen it, is Cotter's 8-stage model of change. And this is definitely probably Tamsin would say, probably a day-long workshop on Cotter. But it's absolutely fantastic, and I'd really encourage you to go out and read some of his books. But essentially what Cotter says is, what you need to do is build a sense of urgency around the issues that you want to change. You then need to bring around you what Cotter talks about, a guiding coalition, but that's essentially a team of people who are going to drive change with you. Together, you then create a strategic vision for what needs to happen and how that will happen. And then you go out into your organisation and you sell that vision, and you recruit people to help you drive that change. And then as leaders within the organisation, you need to be the people that are removing barriers to whatever it is that is stopping the delivery of your vision. And actually, you creating some of those short-term wins is really, really important to sustaining that momentum, which is the next stage. And then when you get into kind of to that sustained acceleration that Cotter talks about, that actually just means going around that cycle again. And depending on how big the challenge is, will depend on how long it takes you to institute that change. But I would really, really encourage you to go out and have a read of that model, because actually everything that I've talked about today and what 2020-21 is going to look like depends on us and depends on our ability to lead change within our organisation. And that's really what I wanted to sum up in terms of what does 2021 hold in store. I don't know what 2021 holds in store. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and we're the people to answer them. If we want to change what volunteering looks like within our organisation, then we need to be the people that make that happen. And HVG will be here to help and support you throughout the year and beyond. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Matt. Thank you for that tour through 2021 and looking at 2020 and looking towards the future and the questions that we have to ask. And of course, if there's anyone here who is interested in sharing their story from 2020 or the work they're doing in 2021, please do feel free to get in touch with us and share your ideas and share if you're interested in sharing it on a future coffee afternoon. But without further ado, I will now introduce Tamsen Russell, our final speaker for today, who will be also reflecting on 2020 and talking about 2021. Welcome, Tamsen. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you very much. So I'm conscious of time and I'm conscious that you've heard lots of different information. So really wanted just to make sure that, bear with me, make sure that there's opportunity for you guys to ask questions as well. But the question that I was asked to reflect on were the experiences of the sector, challenges of the sector, and then looking forward. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Tamsen Russell, and I work for the Museums Association, and as part of my remit, I look after workforce. And my reflections on those three things very briefly from an experience perspective is that all of our experiences are a function of us as individuals, as personal experience. We have our own experiences from a professional perspective. So if you are a coordinator of volunteers or you're a volunteer manager, we also have our own experiences of 2020 from our duty of care. So we've talked about those, we've heard about those examples. And then finally, also from an organisational perspective. So what has our organisation done or not done, closed or not closed, depending on where you are within the UK. And when we're reflecting about those experiences, just some things that are just really important to remember is that those experiences are unique, but also similar. And so wherever we are engaging with individuals, either those volunteers that we support or those partners that we work with or our colleagues that we collaborate with, is appreciating that their experience of the last 9 months is very different from our own personal experience. So they may be similar, but they will not be the same. And so to acknowledge that's really important. And also as part of that is to acknowledge that those experiences are positive and negative, so that both of those things have played out in terms of the time that we've got together, and that they're dynamic, so that there will have been peaks and troughs throughout those few months. From a challenges perspective, I think it's important to think around those external challenges that we've seen. So challenges in terms of revenue generation, perhaps challenges also in terms of lack of guidance or information that's been available to us from powers that be, as well as other guiding lights within the sector. But from an internal perspective, some of those challenges may well have been through lack of preparedness. They might also have been through a concept of culture, whether that be decision making, whether that be hierarchical, whether it be a culture of lack of trust, or a culture of face-to-face, all of those things will have been internal challenges that we would have experienced still at a sector level. From a personal and professional level, there is this concept of identity that's really important throughout all of this. And you may well have experienced those very clear personal challenges, a concept of loss in terms of people that you've worked with or colleagues that have been made redundant, concept of isolation for everybody working from home, and also a concept of respite or freeze. And what I mean by that is that we've had to put lots of things on hold. And certainly from the conversations that I've had with people, that has been most palpable, where we've started to get ready for a new year ahead, you know, April 2021 or 20, what did that look like? And the projects that we developed, the projects that we looked at taking forward, then we'll have to put into sort of hibernation, for want of a better word. So all of those aspects at a personal and professional level have also meant that our levels of satisfaction have been affected, and that then has an impact on our levels of motivation. So the final part in terms of the question looking forward is, I think, just that. Similarly, I am not Mystic Meg. I don't have an opportunity to foresee the future. But when we say looking forward, we mean exactly that. So that's looking forward in terms of time, but also looking forward in terms of positivity. And I appreciate that's a huge ask at the moment, but there are positives on the horizon. They may not be delivered by the end of February. They may not be delivered by the end of a vaccine rollout. But actually, if we don't look forward positively, then actually that has a big impact on our sense of satisfaction, motivation, and genuine well-being. And that's the area of work that I'm most interested in. So from a Museums Association perspective, we have literally launched just 10 minutes ago our new wellbeing hub. And that hub is dedicated to thinking around resilience building, thinking around risk assessments at an individual level around that might affect your own well-being, and also discussions around emotions. So I think, one, we need to look forward. We need to look forward positively. And at the session I was at with Claire earlier on today with the other volunteer group, some of the things I highlighted, and it's nice that it's been reflected in both what Matt has said, but also in what Rhiannon has said, is that we need to be thinking, first of all, around self-care for us. So we need to cut ourselves some slack. We need to have some perspective around what we're doing. I think we also need to feel confident in the contributions we've made to date and feel comfortable within that confidence, and trust our instincts around the way forward. We are the people that most readily understand the context of volunteering and the volunteers that we support and develop. So you know best in terms of what your organisation needs to take forward. We've already talked at length about EDI, and I think this is only going to grow. So from an equality, diversity, inclusions, it's great to see Ben here and Caroline here and Jarina and Annie. We're all working on this behind the scenes, but there is certainly a bigger ask, I think, about how we can address some of the shortfalls that we've seen previously, 5% from a diverse background, to the most recent changes with regard to age, and also, interestingly enough, with the whole concept of homeschooling and caring, the female component there, I think, is a really interesting one to explore. And the final thing I just really want to highlight is, going forward, is thinking around those skills development that you require. So what are the skills that are going to be clear? Hugely digital. How can you develop that digital prowess so you can be confident in creating remote and digital volunteering opportunities? And equally, one of the things that's come out really strongly from our conversations with partners has been around partnership working. We are going to have to capitalise on other people's resources, expertise, and reach. So the way in which we do that is by improving our abilities to demonstrate and develop partnerships. So I'm going to stop talking there and hand back to Rhiannon and to Will. So thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tamsin. Thank you for that brief overview. And of course, there's as you said, there's loads of material in the Museum Association on the website, and alongside there. Is there anything you would recommend for anyone who? Sorry, lost track of what I was going to say. I think a lot of conversations about how to make like virtual volunteering more inclusive. From your perspective, what do you think workforce needs to make virtual volunteering more inclusive?
So I think it's really difficult at the time, at this current time, because, well, for a number of things. First of all, I think, you know, there is a reality around redundancy programs within the sector. That is going to make people feel more anxious around the role of volunteers within their context of work. Equally, it will make people feel really anxious around sharing their skill set with people that are volunteering in their workplace. And I think we need to acknowledge that and accept that and empathise with that. I think other things we just need to think about is about how we become more volunteer-centred. And it's exactly what both Rhiannon and Matt have talked about, is that I still get a sense that some institutions think about volunteering as saying, I've got volunteering for this and volunteering for this. So this is a lipstick and a highlighter, two things in front of me on my desk. And these are the only volunteering opportunities that I have. And you need to do those in the way of a pencil case. So I think there is too much emphasis on organisation prescribing and confining and pigeonholing volunteering opportunities. And I think we need to move to a far more bespoke model, which is saying, we want you to be involved in our organisation. We want to improve your life chances. We want you to feel a sense of civic contribution. We need your expertise. All of those things that we know volunteering is all about. But rather than saying, but you can only do it with a lipstick and a highlighter, we need to give them, she quickly tries to find, a blank sheet of paper. And I know that means more work for us, but it's not about us. It's about them. And you know, lots of organisations do that really, really well. And I think we just need to do more of it. But that is about us trusting volunteers, but more importantly, about the powers that be trusting us to trust our volunteers.
Thank you. That's a really interesting perspective, and almost sort of reset. And that fits in with the sector's wider narrative around breaking down silos and stop thinking in those silo mindsets, and think about how, as a cohesive group, we can do much more for change. And I'd love to hear from anyone else on their thoughts on 2021. What are you looking to do? What do you think 2021 will look like? If you want to pop in, just feel free, or if you want to ask a question to any other participants today, please put a question in the chat. I do have one question which came in from Matt earlier on. Matt, one of the questions around future volunteering was how to include people who are neurodiverse, particularly into environments which perhaps have traditionally been quite exclusive to people with neurodiversity. Do you have any thoughts on that, Matt?
The first thing is to work with people with neurodiverse issues, or who understand neurodiversity. I mean, I certainly don't to any degree. I mean, I can talk about, it's something we talk about Science Museum Group, and how do we make our written material simpler and easier to read, and those kind of things. But actually, this comes back to that point about kind of community engagement and working with partner organisations and working with people who understand the issues that you want to understand, and with the groups that you want to recruit, so that they can inform you and help shape your approach to volunteering. So I don't have any particular insight into neurodiversity other than those that I've just mentioned, but what I would say is actually work with people who do, and that's the key. You talked about kind of working in isolation in terms of organisations. I would say we also kind of work in isolation as a sector, and actually we need to be better at engaging more with the third sector, engaging more with other charities, engaging more with businesses who can help us deliver what we need to deliver.
Brilliant, thanks, man. If you look into the chat, there is discussion around autism in museums, which is a great place to start thinking about neurodiversity in museums, particularly from a visitor experience. But also we can learn a lot more from how volunteers behave on the shop floor as well, from there as well. So that's a good place to start. One of the other questions we had through on challenges, Matt, is how do we bring volunteers along with us? A lot of thinking about change and resets. How do you bring along the volunteers who are already volunteering with you?
This sounds probably quite a controversial point, but is important to long-term strategic thinking. Is, do you want to? if you are looking to create a completely different volunteer program, and the volunteers that you currently have are voicing concerns about that new vision and strategy, I think there's a fundamental question that the organisation needs to answer, and that is, should we be looking to take our volunteers with us? Instinctively, as a volunteer manager, our response is yes. But if that is going to actually make your organisation at odds, if it's going to, for example, inclusion, so actually, if those volunteers are going to make everybody else that you're trying to bring into the organisation feel uncomfortable and they're going to leave, then it's going to have real problems. So I think that's the fundamental starting point. I don't know whether Rhiannon and Tamsin have anything to kind of add to that.
Yeah, I would sort of say the same thing. I think if people aren't on board with some of the changes that you want to bring in for the positive, then actually you need to start sort of chatting to them about whether it's the right place for them to be still. I think it's an interesting year, and actually it's going to be a topic that we're going to pick up again at HVG, actually around those volunteers who haven't returned to your organisations yet, and actually how long do you continue to support them through this year and all the changes. Not an easy topic, not one that we will comfortably want to look at, but we will need to, and ultimately our organisations do need to change moving forward, and we need to take the team with us.
I mean, and I think, I wouldn't like to say what a terrible volunteer manager Matt is. He wants to ditch all his volunteers, but actually, that's the first question. If the answer is yes, then actually what you need to be doing is lots and lots of engagement work, and that might mean presentations and opportunities to engage with senior stakeholders. It might mean one-to-ones. It might mean consistent messaging through newsletters, video recording. It might mean actually giving volunteers the opportunity to feed into whatever it is you're trying to change, so that they actually become stakeholders in the change process. It's all of those kind of things. It's everything that's within Cotter's model, really, that we would do, that any change program we would do with employees, we should do with our volunteers as well. The fact that they don't get paid is almost by the by in terms of creating cultural change within an organisation. I know this is your bag, Tamsin, so do you want to come in?
I disagree. I agree. That sounded like I disagree. I agree entirely, and I think it is about just ensuring you have an ongoing dialogue. But I think something that we just don't often do, and it's still about being respectful, is just have an adult-to-adult conversation. But if I treat you as an adult, then I'm going to be transparent, I'm going to be honest, and I might be a bit matter of fact. I don't want to leave, I don't want anyone to leave the conversation I have with me wounded and bleeding. That's not being professional. But actually there's more, I think there's more damage done by not having honest and transparent conversations with other adults. You disempower them, and you set yourself up for lots of unpicking down the line. And I think we have to remind ourselves that this is a two-way relationship. If there's something that we are needing to move forward for our organisation and that no longer meets the needs of that volunteer, then it's up to them as well, once we've talked around why we're doing it, to make that informed decision about whether this is the organisation they wish to continue to contribute, that valuable contribution. But that just might change because our organisations evolve and develop. And we need to respect their judgment and their interest as much as anything else.
Getting a sore neck from nodding. I completely agree. I mean, some of our museums are going through massive changes at the moment that actually are unsettling for our volunteers, and we are having some of these conversations, and we are having to say, look, this is where we're going as an organisation. This is our vision for the future. We'd love you to be a part of it, but actually, if this isn't the type of organisation that you want to volunteer in the future, that's completely understandable. And actually, we don't say it, but you go with our blessing, and it's like you say, it's having that adult conversation, Tamsin.
One more thing, and I think it is about that blessing, is I've always, when I've managed, I don't manage anyone at the moment, but one of the things I always said to my team is, one of my measures of success as a manager is, if you want to, to enable you to be successful in your next job move or your next life move, whether it's job or life related. And, you know, I take that very seriously, and it's in exactly the same way for our volunteers. Is the experience they have should add value to them as much as value to us, whatever direction or path that takes. So I think, yeah, really good in terms of that moving forward.
Brilliant. Thank you for a really interesting discussion around the future of volunteering in 2021. I think as we reflect on all of our own organisations this afternoon and evening, I think every organisation will have been impacted in some way. Our volunteers have all had a completely different experience to what we had all been used to. And I think having this conversation today really sort of sets that that thought process and getting us thinking about where the next steps are. And a lot of discussions today we're talking about organizational change, like Rhiannon working with different departments for the first time, doing a huge recruitment to bring in thousands of volunteers. And Matt and Tamsin talking about change on a sector level, really, thinking about the impacts of Black Lives Matter, of the economy, of social change on volunteering. And of course, as a workforce, we have to be able to think about change and influence. And coincidentally, in 2 weeks' time, we will be running a masterclass on influence. It will be in 2 weeks' time, same as normal Tuesday. It'll be a bit longer. It'll be an hour and a half from 3 o'clock to 4:30. And we will be asking, Kay Thompson-Barker will be asking, why do we need to wear shoes that don't fit? A short masterclass in successful influencing. And reflecting on 2020 with the changes in politics, so in society and in economics, priorities are changing, principles and values are changing as well, and volunteering will change as a result as well. And for us as leaders or future leaders in the sector, we need to ask ourselves, whose perspective do we represent and whose perspectives do we actually need to understand? And this is where the idea of standing in someone's other shoes comes from, shoes which may not fit your own identity, your values, your culture, and thinking about what other people need. And in this session, Kay Thompson-Barker will show why we need to reflect on different people's experiences, but also how to inspire people, how to inspire decision makers, people with the ability to change funding, to recruit people in the decision-making positions in organizations. And ultimately also how to turn that into people buying your ideas and buying your support and getting the support you need to invoke your ideas and change. So if you are interested in that, please do get in touch. We will be sending an email out this week for that event. But if you are interested, please contact heritagevolunteeringgroup@gmail.com if you'd like to ensure your space there as well. So please do get in touch. We look forward to seeing you there and sort of building on this event now and think about how you can enact change.